Hi, Algebra 2. This is a video of the homework answers for 11-8. So hopefully you have tried these already and you're just checking your answers right now. So if we look at a regular graph, I wrote this over here on the side, y equals a sine of bx. So the number in front of the sine or cosine is called the amplitude. And the number right here in the parentheses after the sine or cosine is the frequency of the graph. So for question 1, I want to find the amplitude, the frequency, and the period. So if we look right here, I highlighted there is no number in front of this. This is g of x equals cosine of 3x. So there's really a 1 here. So my amplitude is just 1. My frequency is this b value. So my frequency is 3. So that's how many times the graph is going to, that cosine function is going to repeat between 0 and 2 pi. The period, we find that by doing 2 pi over b. So 2 pi over 3, and that's my period. So I'll have one full cosine wave between 0 and 2 pi over 3. If I look at b, this time I actually have an amplitude. There's a -5 is in front of the sine. So that's my height. My amplitude is -5, or 5, because I take the absolute value of that. My frequency is 1/2. There's a 1 right here next to that x, so the frequency, the number of times it appears, is 1/2. And my period, again, is 2 pi over b, so 2 pi over 1/2. When I'm dividing and I have fractions, I change to multiplication and I flip this. So this is really 2 pi times 2, which is 4 pi. Okay, so it's going to take for one full cycle of that sine graph, it's going to happen between 0 and 4 pi. So it's going to be spread out more. It has a frequency of half. Only half of the wave occurs between 0 and 2 pi. I need between 0 and 4 pi is one full wave. Now I'm going to be looking at a graph to find the amplitude and the period. So the amplitude is the height. So you can see I highlighted that in green right there. So my height is 2. And my period is pi. Now, how do I know that? Because I'm starting right here, okay? This, by the way, is a cosine graph because you can see I'm not going through 0. The sine graphs start at 0, but this would be -2 because I have a minimum down here. But you can see there's one full wave cycle between 0 and pi, so the period is pi. Here on this second one, this is a sine graph because you can see it's going through 0 right here. The height is 4, so that's my amplitude is 4. And I have one full wave. I highlighted that between 0 and 8, so that's my period. Question 3, which sine function has a period of 8 pi and an amplitude of 2? So right away I can get rid of choice B because that has the wrong height. That had a height of 3. I have a period of 8 pi, so my period is 2 pi over b. I know the period. The period is 8 pi, so I'm substituting in 8 pi for p, and I'm going to solve for b. So I cross multiply, and I get 8 pi times b equals 2 pi, and I'm solving for b, so I divide by 8 pi. The pi's cancel, and I have b is 1/4, so that's why I chose choice D, because that had a b value of 1/4. What is the minimum value of the equation f of theta equals 3 sine of 4 theta? So this has an amplitude of 3, so that means my range is going to go from -3 to 3. My normal range is from -1 to 1, but this has a different height. Question 5, which statement is not true regarding the graph of the equation y equals -2 sine of pi over 4x? So you can see I highlighted in yellow the amplitude. So the amplitude is -2. So choice A is correct. The range then would go from -2 to 2. So that's also correct. So it's really between C and D. So I figured out what the period was. My period is 2 pi over B. B happens to be pi over 4. Remember, when I am dividing by a fraction, I change to multiplication. Look how I changed this to multiplication, and I flip this second fraction. So it becomes 4 over pi. The pi's cancel, and 2 times 4 is 8, so it does have a period of 8. Let's look at choice C. So this is not correct. It says the y-intercept is 0, 2. The y-intercept is actually 0, -2 if I was to graph this, because this is a negative, my amplitude is -2. Okay, so on the next page, I have question 6. They want me to actually sketch the function y equals 2 sine of 4x. So it's important that you know the critical values for the sine graph. The critical values for the sine graph are 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. And those values occur from the points from 0 to 2 pi, because that's a normal period. Now this graph has a frequency of 2. So you can see right here that this, not frequency, sorry, an amplitude of 2. So A is 2. So since my amplitude is 2, my critical values are going to get multiplied by 2. So the critical values that I'm actually going to use for my graph are 0, 2, 0, -2, and 0. Now, where are those critical values going to occur? That is the period. Period is 2 pi over 4. So on this particular graph, I've highlighted in green, my frequency B is 4. So 2 pi over B is the period. 2 pi over 4 means this period is pi over 2. So I'm going to have one full sine wave between 0 and pi over 2. All right, so 0 is 0, pi over 2 is 0, and then I have to divide my graph up into all the intervals between 0 and pi over 2. So look at my graph. Here's 0, here's pi over 2. So I have 3 more critical values between that. Well, half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. Half of that is pi over 8, and then this one is 3 pi over 8. So those are the values on my graph, and then I just plot them. So 0 is 0, pi over 8 is 2, pi over 4 is 0, 3 pi over 8 is -2, and pi over 2 is 2. So you can see I have one full wave of that sine between 0 and pi over 2, and then I just did the opposite values going this way between 0 and -pi over 2. Okay, so that's my sine graph right there. And I also wrote the values down here just so you can see them. This is really 4 pi over 8. That pi over 2, remember how I reduced it? So the values are really 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, 3 pi over 8, and 4 pi over 8. That's another way you can think of dividing this up. And then number 7, I have a cosine graph. So the critical values for cosine are 1, 0, -1, 0, and 1. This is a negative. Okay, so I'm going to change my critical values. All of those have to be multiplied by -1. So my critical values are -1, 0, 1, 0, and -1. Now this 1/2 is my B value. So I do want to find the period. The period is 2 pi over B. So 2 pi over 1/2. Remember, when I'm dividing and I have a fraction, I change to multiplication and I flip this 1/2 to 2 over 1. So it's really 4 pi. So all of these critical values are occurring between 0 and 4 pi. So I have 0 right here and I have 4 pi right here. Now, in between 0 and 4 pi, half of that is 2 pi, half of that is just pi, and in between 2 pi and 4 pi, I have 3 pi. Now, my critical values are -1, so 0 is -1, pi is going to be 0, 2 pi is going to be +1, 3 pi is going to be 0, and 4 pi is going to be -1. So I'll erase these other highlights that I have right there. Okay, and that's my graph. And then I do the same thing going the opposite direction from 0 to -4 pi. But you can see there's one full cycle, one full wave between 0 and 4 pi. This is a cosine graph, so it's not going through 0, 0, but it is upside down. It has been reflected because I have that negative cosine. Okay, and that's it.